Thank you very much. So I'm Aruna Ravichandran, Vice President, Product Marketing at CA Technologies. I have the honor of moderating an amazing panel of DevOps thought leaders and actually people who have actually implemented DevOps. So I'll have every one of them introduce themselves directly.
All right. I'm Ann Hungate. I'm the president of a firm called Daring Systems. But before that, I worked for the last 10 years on the client side as an implementer of automation and engineering practices. Most recently, I was the senior vice president of quality at Fidelity Investments, responsible for workplace investing. Automation. I was also the sponsor of our DevOps early rollout and proof of concept. So I'm excited to be here and talk about this journey. It's really what inspired me to start Daring Systems, which is a firm that helps organizations drive the changes to make DevOps lasting, not only optimizing their tool chain, but actually encouraging the organizational change that's necessary to make it a reality.
Hi, I'm Tracy Bannon. I'm a senior architect with Deloitte Consulting. So we have a couple of different verticals, a number of different verticals being a global firm, and we also have what I call the horizontals. We have a practice around DevOps and around Agile and transformation. My background personally is as an architect, so the different practices and capabilities are things that, quite frankly, I've been doing for a really long time, and now there's a label to all of that. As part of that, though, been spending a lot of time with some of our largest clients in the federal space, at the state level, and also with some of our large banking institutions, with our healthcare, helping them to address the cultural piece of this, which is a real passion area when you tag that with the technology. We talked a little bit earlier, and I'm really passionate about letting people know, as an architect, that it's not about technology. Courtney?
My name's Courtney Kessler. I'm VP of Retail Technology at Starbucks. And what that means is my team focuses on POS and kind of the in-store ecosystem, and we're driving and kind of transforming into adopting DevOps practices within the team. And prior to that, I spent 14 years at Nordstrom. And I share that because I really started in infrastructure and operations and then navigated into dev and delivery, and eventually was one of the leaders that led our lean and DevOps transformation across all of our customer properties. So in-store technology, digital, and basically my experience, I think, helps with sharing that it doesn't just apply to the unicorn companies, it really applies to enterprises as well, and it's methodology independent and it's technology independent.
Great, thank you very much and welcome. So, DevOps has been gaining a lot of momentum over the last couple of years, right? I think the word was actually coined in terms of reality about 6 years ago. In your mind, do you think that DevOps is now actually mainstream?
Well, let me jump in. The word DevOps is mainstream. Because if you look at DevOps in the job boards, it's out there, and the concepts and the acceptance of DevOps as something real is mainstream. What we're seeing in organizations is it's largely getting adopted by digital groups, front-end systems. But the real DevOps, which is ultimately compressing and automating the software delivery supply chain, it's going to take more time, right? The culture that goes with that, and the learning and the coexistence of legacy systems with digital systems. We've got some work there to do, but DevOps, the word, is mainstream.
I agree. The word is mainstream, but the concepts, let's face it, how long have you been doing continuous integration? 10, 12 years. So a lot of the technical principles, right? Except for software-defined infrastructure, which is the new kid on the block, which is helping us a lot, get even more stable that much more quickly. But yeah, it's been around for a while. We've just put a label on it. We've branded it now.
Yeah, and I feel like the underlying principles and practices are really grounded in lean, which has been around forever, and systems thinking. So the branding of DevOps is one thing, but I think under the covers, it's really applying those concepts in a software delivery context. So I think, we talked a little bit about the slippery slope of the term and making sure that the usage of it is really grounded in the behaviors and the practices and not just being used as a label.
Right, and fortifying the business outcomes. So when you compress the supply chain and when you automate this, how does that generate into real value for your customers and experience for your employees?
In fact, that was exactly what I was about to ask you, right? So it's gaining momentum, it's mainstream, we all acknowledge that. What do you think are business drivers? So if you think about DevOps, I actually classify it as a need to do something in order to enable the software delivery life cycle, but there are business drivers tied to that. So what I would like to know is, in your implementation with clients or as an end user of DevOps, what's been your primary business driver?
Well, there have been 3 key reasons that people move towards DevOps, that companies move towards DevOps. They're looking to improve quality. They're looking for faster speed of IT, and they're looking for increased stability. And those 3 things map back to whatever their ultimate business need is, whether it is that they need new features out faster, whether it's they need a better business experience. But those are what I've found to be kind of the 3 drivers, or should I say the foundations, towards the business drivers. How about you?
Yeah, similar experience. In some examples, it was about speed, and I'll give a tangible example. At Nordstrom, we had our digital app, our iPhone app, and prior to transforming to the DevOps practices, we were delivering twice a year, which was just not fast enough. With that, though, came better quality, too, which you'll notice that as you adopt these practices, you typically get quality in addition to speed, and stability as well. I've also seen in maybe in a non-digital example, we had a request to basically deliver more. And so it wasn't really speed, it was just do more. And the traditional mechanism would have been to throw people at it, which may have worked, but instead we chose to apply some of these practices, and we were able to still achieve that business outcome without adding a single person to the team. And it actually improved the team's morale too. So we got a cultural outcome as well, which is another important aspect, I think, of adopting these practices.
It really depended on the business domain. So dealing with some of the large financial institutions, one in particular, we went through a DevOps and Agile transformation, and it really was about being able to put new features, new capabilities, and react to the market quickly. Some of the federal clients that I work with, it's about stability. It's about and again, that even depends on which of the government agencies it is, whether we're working with defense or whether we're working with the civilian side. And it may be all different drivers, right? It really does come back to your business domain.
When I first started, it was about speed, but also the same as Courtney's experience, we were getting work out the door faster. But we also found that we were able to we were able to get more work done with the same amount of people. So we were increasing capacity. I ultimately, to the business drivers, we got to the point of we could start measuring. We saw improvements in engagement. We saw improvements in productivity and efficiency. I'd like to see it, that we take it even farther, that we start seeing improvements in things like net promoter score or better 4C surveys.
So that's the outcome.
Right? Yes.
So going back to the next question, you automatically go to the next question, which is awesome. Help me lead into that question. No, it's phenomenal. So let's talk about that. So we talked about business drivers, right? Quality, speed, time to market. Everybody's got different metrics. But what about the business outcomes? Let's talk about, some of the business outcomes, and how can you actually get the tangible business outcomes? How can you actually correlate those drivers with what you've actually implemented to the tangible business outcomes?
That's why DevOps has to be not just an IT for IT play, because there's this tendency in the straw and this interest to create metrics that matter to IT. Look at my code coverage, look at my defect density. Right, and what we really need to see is how much faster are we getting features out there. So we've got to bring our business partners in. I actually have an example where we had a lot of IT for IT metrics, and I was sharing them with my business partner, and this was early in my journey, and he said, Ann, you're not giving me the so what. Oh, yeah.
The why.
The
why. What's
and
the
I
big
said,
why?
Well, I don't have access to that data. He said, well, you've just asked. And I think that's what, if you're an IT professional promoting DevOps, you actually have to ask, how can I get access to the customer survey? Can I get access to the Net Promoter Score, to the real live unstructured comments that our customers are sending us? And then we were able to actually start building some qualitative metrics that helped us refine the next technology improvement, because we could see what our customers were saying, and then we didn't pick technology improvements that mattered to us as a tech team. They were the ones that mattered to our customers.
So I would actually challenge in all of this. I constantly say this with my teams to the point where I get a lot of eye rolls. What's the why, right? Whether you're business, whether you're IT, mapping back to a why and being able to articulate it. It's like cloud was years ago, right? We're going to do cloud. Why are you going to do cloud? Because we should. We should do cloud. Why are you going to do DevOps? Because we should. We'll be faster. We'll be something. If you can define what it is in your own terms for your organization, you can define the why, what matters to you, then you'll get to the metrics, the enterprise level metrics, the business level high metrics, and then you also do have to be concerned about those foundational metrics, right? What's actually happening, because they roll up.
The technology.
They're right. Because there have to be, in order to give you that feature, right, to show that kind of a throughput, to show that the new business value for that, I might have to know code coverage if I'm having a quality issue. I might have to know defect density. There's some other numbers that are there.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is how do you cascade it to give the teams line of sight? So, you always have traditional business metrics. You're driving sales, you're driving profitability. We used NPS and CSAT.
Actually, you said in Notestorm, you actually measured the customer experience.
Yes.
CSAT, you use CSAT as one of your scores. You also looked at the rating for your mobile application. Can you talk about that?
Yes, and at one point we actually took the teams and restructured. So at one point everybody was very siloed, which is probably not surprising to hear. We had our production support team and our dev team and our ops team. And then we brought them all together. But then we took a step further and we organized them by business outcome. So they weren't the iPhone team. They were the drive CSAT to target X, or drive demand to Y. And that was what they talked about every day. And they had their business partners with them, and they sat and they looked at it and they said, are we moving the needle or not? Are we working on the right things? When we look at our backlog, is it actually going to make an improvement to those metrics? If not, then we should challenge what we're working on. And so shifting the mindset away from, I just get a piece of work and I deliver it, to I'm actually accountable to an outcome and I can see it and I can see this business value.
But you also, at that point, had to allow people to react to numbers. So you look at a number and it's like stepping on a scale, and you have to have a reaction to it, right? I need to eat more, I need to eat less, I need to exercise more, I need more sleep, whatever that thing is. And the number is a reality, not a judgment.
Yes.
And that's a little bit of a different mindset for folks, because they do get used to numbers as a grade. And instead, it's a number as a refiner.
Or a number you can learn from, not a number that's going to punish you,
right,
or as a reflection that you're a bad human being or a bad developer, right? It's, oh, look, when I've got this number, I could do this process a better way.
And that drives those numbers as you start to share them and drive towards transparency, which is another one of those things that I push on, is transparency. As you push on those numbers and for the transparency, they actually become self-fulfilling. People look at those, they say, it's like going on a diet, right? I lost a pound, so I'm going to continue to eat healthy. I'm going to continue to do that. Or I ran a little bit further. I had one client in particular, and their developers had started to hide numbers. They hid their defect numbers until they got into a higher environment, because then they could blame it on the testers. The testers weren't necessarily testing the right way, or the testers weren't tuned into what was going on. And the developers were not logging everything. I actually found that they had an alternate place where they were logging defects. Because they wanted to know, but they didn't want anybody else to know, because there had become a culture of unintentional blame. Nobody set out to blame folks, but ultimately it's not perfect. Well, we're embracing a different way now. We're saying, well, it's not perfect. Great, let's go towards perfect. Let's go towards something better. Let's go towards a number. Let's refine, as opposed to, you failed. So I expect defects.
That's such a great example, because I've run into that at the first team. When I moved from delivery into quality, the first thing I did was find hidden spreadsheets and people their own little logs, because they wanted to keep track, but they were afraid of getting in trouble.
And that comes from top down as well as bottom up. Top down has to have a mindset that if you only have, and I'm going to go back down into my developer weeds, I only have this 15% code coverage. Well, okay, but you have 15% code coverage, half full, half empty. Applaud the success and then amplify it and move forward and raise that up, whatever those numbers are. Avoid the browbeating kind of conversation about it.
So that leads it into the discussion around the cultural transformation, right? So when you think about DevOps, it's not just process, it's not just tools, it's not just technology. A big part about DevOps is about the cultural transformation. And there are a lot of case studies out there, right? So you have all of these unicorns. They are actually wired digitally. They're born digital in my mind. And so they automatically have this concept of these DevOps teams in play. So let's talk about some of the examples in your mind on what needs to happen internally within the company from your examples around leading the cultural transformation agenda. I want to actually understand, do you need a DevOps champion at the top? Can you actually have a cultural transformation if you grow through grassroots efforts, which is more bottoms up? So can we start with you?
Yeah. I can talk about my experience. At Nordstrom, when we started, it was very grassroots, and there was a lot of really great work that happened and results, but it kind of stalled until we were able to really get senior leadership sponsorship. And I talk a lot about the leadership evolution that needs to occur for this to be successful. Leaders have to show up differently. We talked about the behaviors around people not wanting to maybe make problems visible or share certain types of data, because maybe in the past that has led to an outcome that has not been a positive one. I think having senior leaders who are not only engaged, but truly demonstrating the actions that are critical to the success. I mean, I was sharing earlier that when I first started talking about terms like Gemba, which is, go and see, go to where the work is. A lot of us in our traditional leadership roles, the work came to us through status reports or some other mechanism. It's like, no, this is different, go to the work. And I had a lot of, I would say, responses that came back to me that said, well, that's micromanagement. If you show up where the work is, you're micromanaging your team. And I said, I didn't say go and tell. I said go and see. If you go as a leader and you observe and you ask questions and you're genuinely there to help, I think the team starts to respond to that and see that it's okay to surface something that might not be perfect. And we're talking about a system. It is about people at the end of the day, but ultimately you're looking at optimizing the system. And so you need to focus there. And I just think sometimes that a lot of organizations don't recognize the criticality of having the senior leaders, not only saying, I get it, DevOps is important, of course I want to go faster, I want better quality, I want stability, but truly demonstrating their commitment and the value.
Right, that they're willing to do it themselves. Yeah. They're willing to sit in on those meetings. They're willing to go and see. DevOps to me is always going to, if it's new in your organization, there's going to be a grassroots element to it, because it's a lot of cool technologies. And those of us who are, like everybody who comes to a conference, we're interested in growing as professionals. And so we're learning the next thing. But we can't be afraid to go and have that conversation with the VP, with the SVP, and ask for the support. Because without the very top leadership, you're not going to create the environment that allows that feedback and that measurement to make a difference.
You know, in all of this, I'm hearing that there's a need, and I see this with my clients as well, for there to be grassroots, for there to be top-down. What we haven't talked about, though, is that it requires a time commitment. So we're talking about getting everything faster so that we can have less churn, right? So we can be more effective and efficient. It takes time. Just like Agile, lowercase Agile takes time. People have to be fully invested in it. Your champion might not be the guy who only has an hour every week. That executive champion might need to have a full block of time. He might need to be full-time on this. He might need to take a detail on this. So there really is a need for there to be a financial investment in the time for the individuals to be present. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And that's something that I think oftentimes I don't hear coming to the table.
And it also needs to be more of a rewards culture, right? You're trying out something, you're trying to meet those goals, but it should be more about being able to reward successes, not just success, but also applaud the ability of a team or an individual to actually take the risk to try something out.
Right, applaud the risk, not necessarally success or failure. Applaud the change.
Because DevOps is the CALMS acronym. Lots of times we're leading with the automation and leading with the tool, but we've got to lead with culture, right? We lead with culture, and then you apply the automation so that, and only the senior leaders can really drive that culture, can set the precedence to drive the culture in the direction it needs to go.
So what about DevOps teams, right? So we see a lot of articles out there. I recently saw a survey which said that the number of DevOps teams, which grew from 2015 to 2016, went from 15% to 22%. Does it mean that it makes sense to actually pull people from various different functional roles and create a centralized DevOps teams, or is there another way of actually doing it?
So my answer to this is always, it depends. I don't believe, my experience has been that pulling all of your specialists out of their homes and centralizing them all together and having a DevOps team that is somehow going to go and sprinkle DevOps around, all you've done is reorganized and put all of your smart folks over here when before they were in 2 separate groups or 3 separate groups. Now, establishing a dojo or center of excellence mentality where those people who can give, they have that extra capability or knowledge in that area, fantastic. But it's about a project team. It's about a business capability being delivered by folks, and not all of them are going to be in that center of excellence. That's great. So have your center of excellence, have your dojo, but also enable them to help, to coach those projects that are actually going through the throes of implementing DevOps. And when I say implementing DevOps, it's a whole nother hour conversation about what does that really mean to implement from a technology perspective. Because there are bits and bytes all over the organizations right now, and it's not just casting that all aside. It's embracing what's already been done and learning from that as well. So I pontificate a little bit, but go ahead, Courtney.
When you and I chatted earlier, you said that your executive champion at Nordstone used to be the CIO, right, in order to actually bring the DevOps. So can you talk about the process in terms of what you guys actually did? Did you create a centralized team? Did you create a DevOps coaches per se? You talked about something around accelerators. Give us a bit of color around that.
Yeah, so at Nordstrom, when we very first started the transformation, we had a continuous improvement team. And it was a shared service, and they would engage teams and essentially walk them through a value stream map. And it was fairly effective, but it wasn't very, I want to say, maybe organized from a prioritization perspective. So if we were to look at our strategic initiatives and say, who could use this the most? We weren't really following that model. And secondly, everyone wanted to use them. It was like everyone wanted to learn it, everybody wanted to use them, so their demand was way above their capacity. Yeah. So what we said was, let's actually, let's limit the blast radius. Let's take a team that could really use these techniques, and let's train all the way from the most senior leader in that value stream, I'll use that, all the way to the team, and then let's actually embed those folks with the team, but not in a way of saying like the accountability is not with the team, because we would establish roles. So like, who's gonna own the value stream ongoing? Who's the leader who's gonna be the sponsor and the champion for this team going forward? And so we would create those roles. Now over time, we actually put them even closer to the engineering teams. They stopped being a shared service because their ability to accelerate the teams was more effective if they were actually in the day-to-day work with the team. And so at Starbucks, our CTO is a huge sponsor and advocate, so that's fantastic. We followed a very similar model. So I actually have accelerators that are part of my team who are getting my teams I would say on the path faster, acceleration, around capabilities that they just hadn't leveraged before. You know, CI/CD and traditional kind of POS packaged apps doesn't really exist, but it's like, how can we train and understand those concepts in a meaningful way? And it's really helped to not have a shared service team, but really have more of that coaching and acceleration model.
Those experts.
When they're thrown in a shared service team, it's somebody else's job. It's
Exactly.
somebody else's responsibility. You don't have to change the way
accountability
you
is
work. Right. But I love the idea of embedding those accelerators within your team. I mean,
That's that coaching mentality, pull them out of the dojo, put them onto the teams. And it sounds like, I would call that, I don't want to say a pilot, but I would call that your first implementer, right? All eyes on, swarming around to make sure that they're successful, and then repeat that pattern.
Yeah, scale.
Across, right? Start to scale with it.
And
Absolutely.
Tracy, so what about the pilot, right? So I've also heard success stories. One of our customers at CA Technologies is a company called National Australia Bank, located in Melbourne, Australia. Had an opportunity to visit them about 2 months ago. And the way they actually implemented institutionalized DevOps cultural practices is that they created a cross-functional team around one small project.
Exactly.
And they empowered the team in order to basically try different things. They rewarded them they established a merit systems in terms of being able to reward them for the risks they actually took. And they went through the transformational project for about 6 months to actually close to 8 months from what they shared with me. And once they got the thing working very well, then they leveraged that team to be able to share the success across the board in order to create other cross-functional groups. In your mind, have you seen that similar?
Absolutely. It comes down to picking out where you're going to swarm, what's going to be the first adopter. It isn't necessarily that you're going to go and retrofit something that's been in place for a long time. It may be that you're picking from a value perspective, that it's going to be a new feature, a new capability, a new system, a new solution. And you may pick that as though it is a unicorn within your own enterprise.
Yep.
And establish that there. A lot of times you can look across your entire broader portfolio and you have to make some judgment calls. There may be places where you say that this is overcome by events. We're not necessarily going to completely renovate to have DevOps practices because we anticipate that it's probably going to be deprecated in the next 18 months. So we'll leverage some agile practices, but we won't necessarily make broad scale changes there. So I agree with the philosophy that we have to have a group of smart folks, but don't pull them all away from everybody, but instead establish this mentality that you know where to go to get those guys. You know where they're at.
but I like your POC because you don't want to go big until you've figured out how it's going to work in your environment. What's our recommended set of tools and tool chain, and how do we govern them, and how does our team govern, and what's the language that's going to work in our organization? You know, I'm working with a group right now that went with a broad scale rollout and let several different teams give it a shot. And what we've ended up with is each team's done something really great, but very different.
In siloed.
In siloed. So now we can't move people between teams, and it's really hard to get the analytics and insight into the value it's having. So I really like that, bringing some smart people together, starting small with what you've got, and doing what's right in your organization.
You also have to have a good view of where you are. I like to say there are lots of pockets of DevOps that are peppered all over the enterprise. All kinds of, you said grassroots folks, right? All kinds of folks have been doing smart things because they're passionate about what they do. So you've got a development team that's been doing CI for a long time, that's great. They alone have done it over in their corner and it's worked for them, but it hasn't gone into any kind of pipeline. There's been no factory built to move it forward. So if you uncover those things, a lot of times you can, if the enterprise has been established long enough, you can take a look at that and you can start to pluck out and say, well, we actually have some good capabilities. We actually are doing some pretty good things with automated testing. These two teams have done some smart stuff. How do we rationalize that and make it, how do we package it and make it repeatable without being heavy-handed? So there's a certain part of this where we want consistency, but not consistency for the sake of consistency. It's consistency where there's efficiency, consistency where you're reducing risk, but also allowing there to be some variation, because every project team is going to have a little bit of variation, and variation is not a terrible thing. It's only when it runs amok and you can't get the numbers and you can't start to rationalize the values that are coming out.
So outside cultural transformation, we all know that cultural transformation is one of the big impediments with respect to DevOps. What do you think are other hurdles which basically will, not lead to successful DevOps implementations?
Trying to let perfect get in the way of good, right? Folks are trying to get the pipeline perfect, every aspect of it perfect, and not necessarily sharing out on it. That's one. The point about trying to go too big too fast. Right? Try it. Just try it. Put a stake in the ground, get something started, put some controls around it, and always make sure that you're asking why. So don't drive it from a technology perspective. Drive it based on the tie-in to business value.
Do you have a point of view? So we talked about this. We hit on it a little lightly, but I would like to go a little more deeper. So how do you actually get started with DevOps, right? So there is no maturity model per se. Every organization, every vendor is actually different in the industry. The unicorns have a different kind of a maturity model. And
Tracy brought up earlier a comparison to health or fitness. And I really like to think it's okay that everybody's got their own journey. Everybody's got their own journey to health. There's some basic things you need to do first, and that's be willing. Understand, there are some tweaks I can make to have a healthier software delivery lifecycle. Start with what you've got, right? Start small with what's in your control. And enlist the help of others, bring in the help of coaches, surround yourself with a community, be part of that community. So I think one of the things, culture, but knowing where to start is one of the biggest hurdles. And no matter where you start, it's the right place. Whether you're starting by going to the cloud, or you're starting by introducing some automation tools, or virtualizing environments, they're all the right place to start. Not starting is the mistake.
And I think one of my biggest learnings was to start with value and how it flows through the system. Because a lot of times I think teams will jump in and they'll draw conclusions like, well, if we just do test automation, then we are definitely going to go faster and our quality is going to go up. Well, how do we know? We don't really know until we start with understanding how does value flow through the system. So when we get a request to deliver something, I'll use my example at Starbucks. It's like the value my team delivers is features that show up on our registers in our stores. That's one example. So it's like, great. How does that flow? When we get our request from our business stakeholder, what does it take to actually have that land in the store and get consumed by our customer? Which
Courtney, that's one of the problems with DevOps is we have success, or we get something right in one place, and then we forget to build off of it or carry it to other organizations. So I think that's another opportunity for DevOps to accelerate faster is when you learn this, when you have success, either spread it or build off of it. But don't just make it a one and done.
That gets into another whole aspect of cultural change, which is around communication. So it's open communication, it's transparency in what you're talking about. It's about sharing in the failures and the successes as fact. It is but without a judgment on it. This is where we are, and we need to do X next. But that transparency is a real hard cultural change for people. Sharing numbers, even letting somebody assess you, right? This idea of maturity models. Everyone has a maturity model. I work with Deloitte Consulting, and we have assessment frameworks that help us kind of understand where you are right now. When you try and put those kind of numbers against things, when you say you're at level 2 maturity or level 5 maturity, that implies that you've hit a particular place and you're going to stay there. And it's really an ongoing journey.
Right, because it's like being healthy.
Right, you can't stop.
Right.
So you never really get there and stay there.
No.
You have to constantly have eyes on, and things are going to change. Right, technologies are going to change. You have to be able to organically understand the technology as it's coming in. How's that going to apply to what we're doing already? So people have to be able to innovate and to pivot. And that's all around the culture piece of it. The technology is the fantastic, amazing part. I think it's also the easy part in comparison to the human element.
Okay, talking about technology, security is gaining a lot of momentum, especially within DevOps. We hear the concept called secure DevOps. You hear concept around DevSecOps. Everybody's got a point of view on security, and love to get your thoughts on the role security actually plays within DevOps.
Courtney and I debated this earlier. Actually, I think we both kind of high-fived on this. Whoever started to say DevSecOps, so why don't we just say DevTestSecOps? Well, DevTestSec, right? Just keep BizOps. So we'll just add it all together. Security is a part of the fabric of all of it. It is the surrounder. It is from the time that my customers are thinking about a vision. It's every aspect of the way. It isn't something that gets added on. So DevOps is just a moniker, but security is part of every step of every single capability has security baked in.
Yeah, and I think part of why it's getting, whether it's amplified or surfaced in this context is because part of practicing DevOps is you shorten feedback loops, and security is a critical component of getting feedback early and often. And I think it's becoming even more of a headline because of that, but it's never not been a headline. It's like it should always be part of the delivery of your software. It's just that we need it to be more, incorporated and part of that.
We need to make sure that we're bringing security to the table as early as possible. So when we are visioning, they need to be at the table. It should not be that my product is ready now, so I'm going to hand it over to cyber to do some final scans on it, and they'll give me a report, and then I'll address those, because in a waterfall that may have worked because I had 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks built in for remediating those and dealing with those issues. Now I've got an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, but if they're available.
DevOps is a great way to add arms and legs to your security team.
Right.
We can automate and implement the practices that they've figured out that are right for our organization and the risk tolerance for our products and our applications. We can actually automate and build those checks in so we're not creating vulnerabilities.
So I'll throw in something which is kind of provocative, right? So if you think about security testing per se, the reason it's gaining a lot of momentum is you actually want to, let's take one aspect of a software delivery lifecycle, it's security testing. Security testing is usually not done earlier in the life cycle. There is a lot of conversations around it in the market. You want to be able to do not even security testing in your development phase, right? So you want to have the ability to do static analysis. You want to be able to scan your code, and you need to have a way to have that integrated into an IDE environment. Most of the time, people are not thinking about it. If I'm a developer, I'm thinking about feature functionality, but I'm not thinking about it in the concept of security. That's why we recently we acquired a company with CA called Veracode, and we just released a survey where we talked to about about 450 developers and testers. And what we learned was that they're aware about it, but they're actually not using that from a tool chain in terms of best practices earlier on in the life cycle.
I think it depends on the business domain that you're in. Again, I know I come back to that, but working across both commercial and government, security has been a part of the vernacular in the government space for a long time, and in the financial institutions, it's been a part of their taxonomy for a long time. What I think you're seeing, though, is with the startups, with some of the corporations who are now having public-facing systems where everything was internal before, that's where I think you're starting to see some of the security breaches, because they dealt with things that they needed to internally, but everything was inside their control. They weren't exposing anything out to anyone else. Now that they're surfacing web pages, that they're providing mobile apps to their constituencies, to their clients externally, it has a whole new economy to it than what it had before.
Yeah, and I think, so one example of someone who's doing it really well, at least from what I've seen, is Capital One. So they do a lot of external sharing around the automation of their deployment pipeline, which has a bunch of security automation in it, which I think is a great use case / learning opportunity. Also, I think that it's kind of similar, and I don't know if this is fair, to a lot of developers also needing to know more about infrastructure than they ever have before.
Yes. Yep.
So I started in infrastructure. Actually, my first role at Nordstrom was on the security team. So it's like I have this maybe empathy for living in those spaces, but the criticality of the developers on my team knowing network and Windows and database, and they need to know security. It just needs to be part of their toolkit. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not to say that they have to be deep in it, but to your point, having it be an awareness, consideration, it's part of that
stream.
Well, and that's, we talk now about the T model, that we used to just go, you go really deep, and now there's an expectation that you understand multiple domains, even if you don't know them deeply. So in extending DevOps through organizations, this is changes in our HR policies, it's changes in job descriptions, it's changing in learning and development curriculum, so that people can learn and be aware of more domains. So when you're adding or using these tools, you actually understand why you're doing it.
That goes back to what we were talking about earlier around this dojo concept, or having the specialists. You need to have a lot of horizontal learning across the organization. So people need to understand everything that's happening across their team. They have to be exposed to what testing is. They have to be exposed to what the infrastructure concerns are. But I still need to have people who go deep. Right? I still need to have that guy, right? Those people that I call because I need to go to that extra level, or I need to have that education that's happening. Mm-hmm. So you do need both vertical and horizontal.
So in the last year's Puppet Labs, State of the DevOps report, they actually came up with some interesting learnings. I know that the recent report was just, I think, launched today. So one of the key areas when they talked about technology, especially in the area around quality or test automation, is they talked about test data management, actually gaining a lot of credibility in the market. So can you comment about any examples of leveraging test data management within Nordstrom or within Starbucks and the role it actually plays?
I can speak to kind of shifting the approach.
Yep.
So I think that I'm going to talk about kind of the traditional model of I need a gold copy of production, I got to mask it, I got to do manipulation, but I want all of my non-production environments to have production data, because if not, my test cases are going to fail. I think getting away from that model and being more about what is the data required, and how do you build it more continuously.
Yes.
Versus I got to lift and shift a production copy, which frankly, at least in my experience, didn't always give the outcome.
No,
I mean,
it gives you
yeah.
normalized, right? All
Yeah.
your border cases aren't handled by that, and those are the things that take your system down, right? Or when you haven't hit that border case because you didn't have that data. Well, we never ran into that before.
Or there's a new product. That
Right.
product doesn't roll out yet, so we don't even have that data.
Right, we don't have that type of data,
And-
so
and
understanding.
the other thing is GDPR, right? So with the GDPR regulation, you can't
Yes.
really do that. You can't
No,
actually,
you're right.
take all of the production data without having to,
You
worry
can,
about
you
all
can
of the
profile it,
regulations.
safely profile it. You can use some of the different tools that are available to be able to get an understanding of the extents of what you have there to get a better idea of what your data coverage is. So when you have test data, just like you have your test coverage, what are your scenarios? You also have to have data management the same way so that you understand, what do I have all of my test cases? Do I have all the data
So
permutations
there's
that I
got to be
need?
investment. I think organizations need to be prepared to be investing in test data management. If not this year, then they need to rethink it. They need to start working on it right away. And one of the reasons why organizations haven't invested in test data is it's a hidden cost, right? So people are just doing what it takes. They're finding the data, they're reserving it, they're scrubbing it, they're aligning it, they're just doing what it takes. And so we've talked about grassroots and we've talked about senior leadership, but now we need, everybody in the middle to start coming together and really exposing that cost. Because in order to get the support from executives to invest in test data, we have to articulate the pain point, whether it's the exposure, the time it takes, the vulnerability, the cost. So we need to start pulling that out so that it's easy to make the business case to
You could
invest.
easily say, though, I could automate my entire pipeline. I could have a fantastic factory. I could be pushing things through. But if I'm not testing with realistic data that hits all the extents of the possibilities, then I really haven't done a good job. So it doesn't matter how fast I'm pushing it through. I really haven't covered what I've needed. We're spending a lot of time, especially with the federal government right now, in some of our, on the non-defense side, on the civilian side, around taxes and treasury and other areas there, heavy focus on test data management because there's so many different sets of data. So you have to be able to, in some of the unique scenarios that they have, be able to reserve data based on the sets of rules that applied to it. So I have version 1 of the software, and here are all the rules and the data for that version of the software. I now have version 2 of the software. What are the rules and the data, and how has that data transformed for that set? And so you'll have sets of data being managed, right? Test data management will have those based on versions of software, based on features, and where features are in their life cycle. So it becomes more complex, but it's also more of an imperative.
Okay, great. So we have 2 minutes. So let's have you go and share words of wisdom. Like if there is, I can say one piece of wisdom, whatever you want to be able to share with the audience in terms of DevOps implementation. We talked about culture. We talked about having leadership at the top. We didn't go deep into the tools and technologies around capabilities, which people need to think about. Any words of wisdom or last parting words?
I think everybody needs to take a look in the mirror at themselves, what they can control. Are you part of the DevOps transformation, or are you clinging to past practices and ways that you've managed yourself? Because ultimately, we can all manage ourselves. So what do you need to do to become a contributor to the DevOps community, to promote DevOps practices in your organization, and to be a learner?
Great, thank you.
I would say 2 things. Number 1, ask why. You've got to figure out the whole impetus. Why are you doing this? Make sure that you can clearly articulate that. Make sure the executives can articulate it. Make sure the project teams can articulate it. And the second thing is actually do it. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. Take a step, because that's the first part of moving forward.
Great.
I was going to touch on the community piece too, because I think there is so much sharing that goes on in this community. And I know for me, when I first started getting exposed to it, I was actually kind of surprised at how open a lot of organizations, especially in what you might consider to be traditional competitors. So like when I was at Nordstrom, I did a lot of sharing with Target and Disney, because this is not competitive advantage. Your strategy is separate from these practices, but you can learn so much from others. And so I just strongly encourage people to get that external inspiration, talk to people. The problems aren't new. You're going to find someone who's been in the same boat, but you know, expose yourself to the community as much as you can.
Great. Thank you very much for joining this panel today. Thank you, guys.